Hello and welcome to The Top Story, a podcast with the headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. I'm Qizhi. Coming up in this edition, leaders launched the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty on the first day of the G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro. Lebanon and Hezbollah have agreed to a US proposed ceasefire with Israel, with some issues remaining to be worked out. And Russia has pledged what it called an appropriate and tangible response if Ukraine uses long-range missiles provided by the United States. We begin with the ongoing G20 summit in Brazil. Leaders have wrapped up their first day in Rio de Janeiro after launching the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty. Chinese President Xi Jinping said China's achievements in poverty alleviation have given other developing countries the confidence to strive for the same goal. President Xi stressed that China will always be a member of the Global South and a reliable and long-term partner of developing countries. He also outlined China's 8 action plans for global development. Chen Ziyuan reports.
Calling for more bridges of cooperation, Chinese President Xi Jinping delivered speeches about world hunger and government reform on the first day of the G20 Leaders Summit on Monday.
I have worked in China's villages, counties, cities, provinces and the central government. Poverty alleviation has been an important part of my work and a major issue that I aspire to solve. China's journey out of poverty has shown that with resilience and perseverance, the issue of poverty in developing countries can be solved, and that the weak birds can fly early and soar high. If China can make it, other developing countries can make it too. This is the global significance of China's success in winning the battle against poverty.
President Xi told the gathering in Rio, China will always be a member of the Global South, a reliable long-term partner of fellow developing countries, and a doer and go-getter working for the cause of global development. With the launch of the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty, President Xi announced China's participation and outlined China's 8 actions for global development. These 8 actions include pursuing high-quality Belt and Road cooperation, implementation of the Global Development Initiative, supporting development in Africa, supporting international cooperation on poverty reduction and food security, proposing the initiative on international cooperation in open science to help the Global South with Brazil, South Africa and African Union, supporting the G20 in anti-corruption action plan, and open doors wider to the least developed countries. The steps include a financial commitment of 80 billion yuan, around $11 billion in the Silk Road Fund, and nearly 360 billion yuan, which it is about $50 billion to support African development. President Xi said, China is ready to take steps together with all parties to build a just world of common development, leave poverty in the past, and turn our vision into reality.
That was Chen Ziyuan reporting. On day one at the G20 Rio summit, the Chinese president also called for joint efforts to build a fair and equitable global governance system. He warned against politicizing economic issues, fragmenting the global market, and taking protectionist moves in the name of green and low-carbon development. He also said global development should be more inclusive, beneficial to all, and more resilient. Gao Yiming has more details.
The Chinese president highlighted 2 documents adopted at the 2016 G20 summit in China's city of Hangzhou. They are the G20 Action Plan on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the G20 Initiative on Supporting Industrialization in Africa and Least Developed Countries. This year's summit focuses on building a just world and a sustainable planet. As the host country, Brazil has placed fighting hunger and poverty at the top of the agenda. It's announced to establish the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty. Xi Jinping stressed the same goal from the Hangzhou summit to the Rio summit is to build a just world of common development. President Xi said China's achievements in poverty alleviation have given other developing countries the confidence to strive for the same goal. Chinese President Xi Jinping has stressed that China, as a member of the Global South, will always be a reliable long-term partner of developing countries and work for the cause of global development.
That was Gao Yiming reporting. Turning to the Middle East, Lebanon and Hezbollah have agreed to a US proposed ceasefire with Israel, barring some outstanding issues that still need to be worked out. An aide to Lebanese Parliament Speaker Nabi Berri says White House envoy Amos Hochstein is headed to Beirut to continue talks. Israel has yet to comment on its stance. Jonathan Regev has more from Tel Aviv.
What seems to have happened is there's an American draft resolution drafted with Israel and presented to Lebanon and to Hezbollah. They may be in the same place, but they're practically two different entities, the state of Lebanon and Hezbollah. And the response was practically positive, mostly positive, let's put it this way, from both sides. As far as we understand, the main point of contention is the freedom that Israel is asking to have in southern Lebanon if the proposed agreement fails, if there are some intrusions into that agreement. This is something that Israel is asking for. Freedom of operations in southern Lebanon if the agreement is broken. That is something that Hezbollah is unable to agree to, according to the answer which was presented by Nabi Berri, who is the head of the Lebanese parliament and with very close ties to Hezbollah. According to him, this is the main point of contention. And the Lebanese Prime Minister, Najib Mikati, saying that there's no way that the state of Lebanon will agree to any kind of a formula that will allow the Israeli army back at any time that Israel would decide into Lebanon. Mikati adding that the only power, the only legal power that should have weapons in southern Lebanon is the Lebanese army, not Hezbollah, and clearly, according to Mikati, not the Israeli army. Despite all of that, there seems to be optimism in Lebanon that an agreement can be reached. We know that the U.S. envoy Amos Hochstein, who is the envoy of the current administration, but is also in talks with the coming administration, the Trump administration. He's set to arrive in Lebanon for discussions. Things seem to be progressing. It doesn't mean that we will see an agreement today, tomorrow, or even next week, but discussions are ongoing and there seems to be some progress for a ceasefire resolution, which may eventually come in the coming weeks.
That was Jonathan Regev in Tel Aviv. In Europe, Russia says it will make an appropriate and tangible response if Ukraine uses long-range missiles provided by the United States. A foreign ministry statement says such an attack inside Russian territory would represent the direct involvement of the U.S. and its allies in hostilities against Russia. U.S. officials say President Joe Biden has authorized Ukraine to use long-range American weapons inside Russia. The move marks a significant policy shift in Washington as the Russia-Ukraine conflict enters its 1,000th day on Tuesday. Dasha Chinichova reports.
At least one senior official in the Russian parliament said permitting Ukraine to use American missiles to strike deep into Russian territory could lead to World War III. Peskov stressed that such a decision by the outgoing administration in Washington is an escalation that adds fuel to the fire. Peskov also said that Russian position had already been clearly stated by Vladimir Putin. The Russian leader had said that any such decision would change the nature of the conflict and constitute direct Western involvement. In September, Moscow changed its nuclear doctrine, explaining that support for a non-nuclear state by a nuclear one would be seen as participation in an attack on Russia. Meanwhile, Russian officials say they doubt the decision will have any impact on the course of the special operation. The head of Russia's State Duma Defense Committee, Andrei Kartapolov, stressed that Russian air defense systems can very effectively operate against all types of Western long-range ammunition. Meanwhile, the Kremlin says the option of freezing the Ukrainian conflict along the lines of military confrontation is unacceptable for Russia.
That was Dasha Chinichova on the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which marks its 1,000th day on Tuesday. Finally, in Asia, successive typhoons have battered the Philippines, devastating rice fields and deepening the country's rice shortage. As COP29 continues in Azerbaijan, the country's calls grow for stronger climate action and financing. Gretchen Malalat reports from Manila.
In less than a month, 6 typhoons have battered the Philippines, leaving catastrophic devastation. In early October, Tropical Storm Trami and Typhoon Kongray triggered deadly floods and landslides, claiming 162 lives. Typhoons Ginseng, Toraji, and Usagi followed, wreaking havoc across provinces. And just last Sunday, millions were forced to evacuate as Super Typhoon Mani unleashed powerful winds and massive tidal surges, compounding the crisis for already struggling communities. Aside from the damage to infrastructure, the agriculture sector suffered the most. This farmland in Cagayan province was littered with debris from extreme flooding. In the town of Fami in Laguna province, which is 3 hours away from capital Manila, farmers have lost their livelihood.
Farmers were just days away from harvest when a string of powerful typhoons hit, leaving crops waterlogged and in many areas completely destroyed. Now, instead of reaping a full season's yield, farmers now face a devastating loss, not only of their harvest, but also of their income, casting a shadow of uncertainty over the months ahead.
Erickson Matalag was set to harvest around 200 sacks of rice from his 2-hectare field. But heavy rains and strong winds from recent typhoons left his farmland flooded, destroying his crop.
I can't salvage anything here because the grains have rotted, and it pains me. I can't even use them as animal feed because all of them are rotten.
The Philippine government has pledged support for affected farmers. The Agriculture Department is rolling out financial aid. The extensive damage to farmland has deepened the country's rice shortage.
Unfortunately, I have just received a report from the Agricultural Department, and it's likely that we have to import more rice. We will import close to 4.5 million tons.
The recent series of typhoons have intensified pressure on the Philippines' representatives at the UN Climate Conference in Baku, Azerbaijan. Environmentalists and civil society groups at COP29 are calling for an immediate release and expansion of the Loss and Damage Fund to support vulnerable nations grappling with the climate emergency. On the sidelines of the climate conference, the Philippines formalized its hosting of the Loss and Damage Fund Board by signing the host country agreement. The Environment Ministry says the country could serve as a test case for the fund, aiding communities in recovering from the climate crisis.
That was Gretchen Malalat reporting in Manila. Now, recapping the headlines, leaders have launched the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty on the first day of the G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro. Lebanon and Hezbollah have agreed to a U.S. proposed ceasefire with Israel, with some issues remaining to be worked out. And Russia has pledged what it called an appropriate and tangible response if Ukraine uses long-range missiles provided by the United States. And that's it for this edition of The Top Story, a podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics, business, sports and culture, you can subscribe to the Beijing Hour, a 1-hour podcast news magazine program. We welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I'm Xi Zhi. Thank you for listening.